Hey everyone, welcome to the Mobile User Acquisition Show. In the Mobile User Acquisition Show, we talk about how to use mobile user acquisition strategies to grow your app quickly and capital efficiently. The Mobile User Acquisition Show is presented by me, Shamant Rao, mobile growth leader and founder and CEO of the mobile growth consulting firm Rocketship HQ. Each episode includes strategies, tips, and pointers from the leading edge of mobile user acquisition that you can use to unlock tremendous growth for your app in a sustainable and capital efficient manner. In today's episode, we have an all-star panel featuring three of the smartest folks we know in mobile growth. This episode features Eric Seufert from Mobile Dev Memo, mobile growth consultant Thomas Petit, and Nebojsa Radovic from Network. What are advertisers solving for? What kinds of advertisers will be the most and least impacted? Of the solutions proposed, what's realistic and what isn't? There are a lot of questions in the months leading up to IDFA deprecation. Each of our superstar guests offers their tips, strategies, and opinions on what the mobile marketing world will look like post-IDFA, and more importantly, they will share their advice on how to prepare. I'm very excited to host this all-star panel on the Mobile User Acquisition Show. I have with us Eric Seufert from Mobile Dev Memo and Mobile Growth Consultant, Thomas Petit, Mobile Growth Consultant, and Nebojsa Radovic from Network. Again, all three of you, you've been fairly vocal, fairly opinionated around everything that we are seeing and everything that will unfold in the next couple of months. And I couldn't think of smarter folks to have on this show to really distill what the short and medium term looks like for mobile marketing and mobile measurement specifically, how we all look at things. And Eric, you certainly popularized calling this the apocalypse, but what does the apocalypse look like in the specifics? And yes, we're very, very thrilled to dive into all of this today. To start off, there's been a lot of people talking and writing about what's happening out there. Certainly, ad tech companies and MMPs that have benefited from the older paradigm of how mobile marketing functioned. They've put out, opinion pieces. They put out how they're going to address the post-iOS 14 landscape. Now, of all of the things you're seeing out there, what's realistic and what's realistically possible? What just isn't going to work? And Eric, if you want to take that, because I know this is something you've had opinions on, but I would love to kick things off there.
Sure. So I think if I try to evaluate all the proposals I've seen just on the basis of like feasibility and viability, in the context of kind of understanding how Apple plans to enforce this change, which I think is very aggressively, right? I don't get the sense from Apple that the change was announced, but they're going to sort of abide a bunch of loopholes and workarounds, that it was just sort of a symbolic gesture, but it doesn't really have any teeth, and they're not gonna enforce it, full-throatedly. So within that context, I think the products I've seen or the approaches I've seen that I believe are the most viable are just the ones that fully lean into like an actual paradigm shift, meaning that, hey, this is going to require people to start doing measurement in a probabilistic way. And so, I've seen some kind of like media mix models be proposed. And my sense is that that's the way forward. First of all, maybe you can come up with a viable workaround that, you have to kind of acknowledge there's going to be some sort of like cat and mouse dynamic here, that these ad tech companies are going to put forth these solutions that aren't fully compliant with like the spirit of these privacy changes, and then Apple's going to shut them down and they'll come up with a different workaround. And there's going to be maybe like a year or 18 months of that kind of back and forth. But like as an advertiser, if you're building your infrastructure, right? You want to build it once. You don't want to build it 8 times or 6 times or whatever to accommodate these sort of like short-term solutions. So I think as an advertiser, you're probably just thinking about, okay, what can we build that's gonna sort of withstand withstand the sort of the test of time here. And so I think just from like a pure like efficiency of resources standpoint, you probably want to be focused on the longer term solution versus just a bunch of like a series of short term solutions. But yeah, my sense is that like it's mostly having to do with like the analysis of measurement, right? So recognizing that the deterministic is probably, and deterministic had been kind of an illusion for a long time. I mean, you had LAT, you had the SANs that basically front run the sort of conversion claims. So that was kind of, if you sort of acknowledge that was illusion all along, I mean, and then you just look at like some of the bigger advertisers moving this direction anyway, even before this was announced, or even before they could kind of, guess that this would come, even before they could sort of like, anticipate this. A lot of people are moving that direction anyway. So it feels like, given that, there was already sort of, momentum in this direction, it's probably the right direction.
Sure. So definitely there's going to be more and more of a shift towards probabilistic thing. The short-term fixes people claim, definitely ad tech companies, because that's where their bread and butter lies. They claim for short-term solutions, but you don't want to be building on that. Curious, Nebo, Thomas, what did you guys have any thoughts on this, about what is realistically possible, what isn't realistically possible?
Yeah, I'd agree with Eric that the workarounds is not going to stick forever, and investing in something that might get shut down anytime is a bit of a wrong bet. Sort of, you're like Criteo in 2017 or something. It's not a good position to be in, to be honest. I think a lot of it is because we're before the launch. There's something I'm worried about is the timing, because we have very little to prepare, like us as advertiser, but also vendors. And I think here Apple could have done something a little bit better, like releasing actually the SKAd network before iOS 14 and all. But what I'm thinking is a lot of ad tech is like trying to see where they can move, but I think the sky is going to clear very fast. And like we're in this bizarre situation now because it's July, August, but I guess 2 months from now, all these loophole, I mean, that's not going to stay.
Yeah. Right, and the loopholes, we'll know where Apple stands on the loopholes, know how things go. Go ahead.
I would also agree with Eric that what we believe, like the deterministic solution we had, was like a lot of people believed that this was the attribution, and it's partly fallacy. Attribution is very complex. That's why, I mean, when you look in App Store Connect and Apple is telling you that 70% of your downloads are organic, and then you look in your MMP and it's 30%, and like something is wrong here. I don't know who's right, but I know something is wrong. And I'm not saying Apple got it right either, but in a way, it might be good because it might be make us rethink in a very different way. Attribution is a very complex topic, not only on the technical side, but on how you interpret it and all. And I believe, personally, the MMP, what they should do is embrace the fact that some people recognize them as attribution specialists, not deterministic specialists. And there will be complexity in mixing up what comes through SKAd network, what comes through media mix models, and it's not going to be easy at all, and it might be not as profitable as it used to be, but I think they should be the one who are going to educate people around the fact that it's going to be more complex to approach attribution. Like the previous one was simple, and that's like why people loved it. The new one might be not as accurate, but it will force us into embracing the complexity that attribution has by nature. And in the short term, it's a problem. In the long term, might be an opportunity, really.
Yeah. You're making sense of an imperfect world, and whoever does that best will really win in the medium to long term. Cool. Yeah. And to switch, Nebo, did you want to say something?
I mean, I agree with everything Thomas and Eric said. Figuring out like workarounds might help in the short term, but we need to come up with a more kind of scalable solution that is going to kind of work for like months, not like days, so or like years. So I think we're all on the same page there.
Yeah. Right. And Nebo, I know your team works on publishing games, scaling games, so you perhaps have some a more nuanced understanding of how this can impact very many app developers, especially the small and medium-sized developers that typically benefit from publishing. And I do know that a lot of mobile publishing has been very, very UA focused. So how do you think iOS 14 changes things for publishers, developers who rely on publishers, and specifically gaming, right? So what's your sense about how this will play out, especially for the smaller app developers?
Yeah, so I have a few theories, and the first one is that publishers that have a lot of payer profiles, basically the impact of those payer profiles will diminish. It just won't be as big as it was before. So it might make more sense to work with a publisher that's really good at kind of technical UA, understands incrementality, understands how to do like a probabilistic attribution well, as Eric and Thomas talked about, then to work with a publisher that just has a lot of IDFAs that they could retarget, because that won't be possible anymore. A good thing about like payer profiles is that Facebook and Google are already moving away from them, and like Facebook is testing AAA ads that don't really leverage lookalikes, so that means that they won't be as necessary. But I think the key point here is just that if you're a small developer, you should really look for like a publisher that's really good at technical UA, that understands how to find players without like AEO and VO, how to do the proper campaign setup in the post SK ad network world, and understands incrementality, lift studies, et cetera. Another interesting thing is like it's questionable whether like DSPs will exist. They will in a certain extent, but without the ability to kind of target specific IDFAs, or to be more precise, to filter out specific IDFAs that are never going to install your app, it's likely that the cost is going to go up. So publishers with a DSP, at least in the short term, might not really have like kind of that competitive advantage. And the last bit is, when it comes to the type of games that small developers want to build, I don't really understand yet what's the real impact on ad monetization, and whether the fact that big networks, especially Facebook and Google, who are kind of good at cherry picking impressions, whether they'll be still interested in paying like pretty kind of like premium kind of CPMs for those impressions, now that they're not really able to identify who the user behind the impression is, and what's basically the impact of that on impression level bidding and impression level revenue reporting, because that's kind of crucial for hyper casual developers in understanding how good the monetization is for the games they're building. So that might kind of cause a certain shift in the types of games that are being built, and developers might move away from ad monetized games to kind of games that monetize more with IP. But that's just a guess, obviously.
Which I argue is one of the big reasons Apple is making this move at the end of the day, because they never liked the ad monetization system, but also because they can get, their goal is to grow the services category, and that goes through selling more search ads, but that goes mainly through selling and a lot more. Search ads is one, and IAPs are like 100. So I think pushing people towards IAP and subscription is one of the goal behind this change. One of them, maybe the only one, but so that makes a lot of sense.
So, probably Apple Arcade as well. It's like is directly competing with hyper casual developers, and they kind of want to have like a bigger a piece of that pie. So that could be. That definitely is one of the reasons for this shift.
Yeah. So you're saying, looking at the macro picture, Apple isn't getting a 30% cut of ad monetization revenues, and that's really one key motivation. And do you guys anticipate come September, October, ad CPMs are going to crater? And do you think that's going to somehow make up for the reduced targeting, the reduced ROAS numbers that we're all going to see?
I believe we will see at least a temporary drop, because some people will freak out and at least assess their position. I think there are really two periods here, like the transition period in the 1, 2, 3 first months, and then people will readjust. So I'm not sure about next year. For this year, my question is not so much about how much will they drop, but is it going to be enough to compensate the lower side of optimization? And I think this is one of the big known unknowns of this problem. Is
Yeah.
we know the machine learning algorithms are going to operate in a weaker manner, but I'm not sure CPMs are gonna like overcompensate it. My experience in UA when there was smaller shift than this one is things adjust. The day Facebook broke or that day, at the end of the day, the big ones they're smart and they make the bids based on what they return. So I guess very soon we will find a new balance. But the transition period might be like there's a big unknown on the transition period for sure.
Sure. And Eric, you wrote this week about how at least 50% of Facebook's efficiency is attributable to impression level monetization. Right? And you quoted a paper from Facebook. Curious how you see this play out.
Well, they said that. That was not me. They said
Oh, they
that
said that. You
on
quoted it.
FAN. On FAN,
Yeah.
The personalization of the ad, placement was made up for 50% of the CPM price. I mean, I think the problem here is like, targeting is the product, right? And so that's what kind of validates the price. And so if you get rid of the targeting, I don't know that you could say that like, well, now we're going to like this really generic, more sort of like broad, just level of aggregating revenue around these different placements and then seeing which of those were worth it. I think if you can't target these users individually, and like we know that the distribution of spend is super long tail for like just especially in gaming, people that monetize to a very high degree, right? And we know that there's a big fat portion of the curve at zero, right? We know that. And so then when you say like, well, we can no longer target that super long tail, it's not like, okay, well, if efficiency drops by 20%, but say, hey, our costs drop by 20%. It's like if the efficiency drops by 20%, you might not be able to spend anything, right? Because you're no longer able to target those high monetizers, and you're then trying to average out their contribution as 5% of a broader pool of people that you're onboarding versus now where Facebook's able to increase that representation, and it's still really hard to scale, right? So it's still really hard for gaming companies to scale, even though they're using like the most sophisticated sort of machinery in the world to sort of hyper target the people that are most likely to spend in your apps. It's still hard to scale, right? And so without sort of over indexing on those people that do spend money, I don't think you can say, well, we know that we're bringing in 100 users and for every 100, one will spend. I just don't think the user economics work that way. Now, I think a big question for me, and like a lot of the pushback I've gotten in that article is a couple things. Like one is people said, well, I think you're being overly pessimistic around the opt-in rates. We think the opt-in rates will be 70%. And like that to me seems delusional, but I would love to get everyone's opinion on that. I mean, I've indexed when I've used an estimate for opt-in rates, they've been indexed at the poll that I did on the Mobile Dev Memo Slack, where most people said it was going to be between 10 and 20%. I mean, like the vast majority of respondents said between 10 and 20%. So that's where I'm going. Also, I mean, I've taken some guidance from like the actual GDPR opt-in rates. Like when the opt-in mechanic is not gamed, right? In a lot of cases it is. There's like dark patterns that just sort of get you to click because you want to get it out of your face. But when the GDPR opt-ins have conformed to the spec that they're supposed to use when they build these tools, opt-in rates are like 10%. And I mean, that's not, a guess on my part. There was a paper that was floating around like 2 weeks ago. So I think, and Apple is not allowing anybody to game the pop-up because it's, they control the design of it. Well, the design and then the headline text. So people said, hey, no, you're overly pessimistic. We think it's gonna be like 70%. It'll have an impact, but it won't be so dramatic. And then, some other people said, well, you're way overestimating the share of app revenue for Facebook. So Facebook, there may be 10% or 20% of the revenue comes from app installs. It's not a majority, like you say. So it's not going to hurt Facebook that much. It'll hurt app advertisers, but Facebook as a company won't be hurt that bad. So I don't know. I would love to get people's feedback on those 2 points.
Yeah.
On the Facebook point, especially, it seems not credible to me that their app install revenue or their app advertising revenue is much less than half, because they've said publicly 94% of the revenue comes from mobile.
Yes.
So how is it all just web-based D2C? Like how is the majority of the revenue not app if the majority, if almost all of it, if it is mobile?
Exactly. And the vast, there's so games, we know how much mobile ad spend is. It's expected to hit 240 billion this year. It's reasonable and safe to assume a lot of that is going to Facebook, and I'm sure there are estimates that say what percentage of that goes to go to Facebook. Right. Yeah. And to switch gears a bit, Thomas, you've worked on very many different kinds of apps, many subscription-based apps, and certainly a couple of apps for kids. Certainly you worked very much on Apple Search. So what are some of the pieces of advice that you're giving app developers that you're working with, considering they are so heterogeneous?
The main advice I tell them is be ready. We can't do anything, but we need to act super fast as soon as we are. So we're like everybody, like trying to figure out how we're going to do it. But it's not like we can already deploy the infrastructure that we will need by September. So what I'm telling them is be ready, because in 2 months we're going to need to act right on. This thing is going to happen immediately, and we need to plan it in Q3 and Q4 in the roadmap that we will need to shift our whole data infrastructure there, but we can't even really get started. I mean, you can poke around the documentation, but it's not the same. So the first thing I tell them is put this thing on the roadmap, because it's huge. It's changing a lot of things. That's the first one. There's a particular case for the kids app that Apple, after doing some bizarre change of dates around, started enforcing that the IDFA is dead for kids app by the 30th of June. That's been like 3 weeks. And I can tell you it's not fun. I mean, there's one particular situation where it's war room is on fire every day and all, but I believe they will they will end this with an advantage, in the sense that they had to fast forward the thinking, shift the strategy, how do we prepare earlier than the other people, and when comes September, October, there's a lot of the research and who's in charge of that, and the endless discussions and reading that will have been done. It's a bit of a tough situation now, because they can't use the IDFA, but they can't use SK network either. Which brings me to an interesting topic, and sometimes I see I had this comment on LinkedIn recently of somebody saying, no, everybody's going to switch all the budget to Android, and I can't remember if it was web or B2B sales or whatever. I was like, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's happening, for the main reason that iOS users are just spending so much more, and if the pressure on the Android inventory is raised by that much, it's not going to be profitable for people. But this is the kind of things that we have to think about for the very short term, because we're in this, for kids app, in this intermediary situation where we don't have the new solution, but we don't have the old one either, and it's kind of a bizarre thing. It's not a great position to be in. I chatted with kids app who are fingerprinting, some others who stop UA, some others who run blind. It's a fun thing, and I think they will be more prepared by then, but it's tough. And you mentioned subscription app. I think here subscription app has a slight advantage too. Other typically gaming with very long-term retention, where you've got cohorts of people who keep retaining and paying for months, sometimes years. I mean, the very big hits of the App Store, they're all 4 or 5 years old, and they still have. Not all the users are new. Those who are making money, some of them they're just fanatics who've been playing for a very long time. And here it's going to be very hard due to the mechanics of SKA network. The thing that benefits slightly subscription, but I think is bad for Apple, is a lot of subscription happen on the very first day, and a lot of them happen on the onboarding. Depends if the developer is a little bit more what I call aggressive with his onboarding paywall or not, but still a fact that for most subscriptions, a majority happen on day one. So that will make a little bit easier on reporting because you can extrapolate in a slightly more reliable manner your day one events to LTV. Also because subscription don't have like this whale structure of revenue, and pretty much everybody pays the same, even if it's not entirely true. So that makes it a little bit easier. The thing that I see as a negative there, and I don't know how Apple is going to react on the midterm, is that it pushes everybody to be more and more and more aggressive, to make the most revenue and extract as much revenue and as much data as you can in the first time experience, which I'm a little bit afraid of how far those strategy can go, because I know I've crossed the line a couple of times myself with some products where we had really nice uplift, but I mean, the experience was not great. And if everybody moves to a more aggressive position because we have this timing issue on the event, that might be a bit of a problem in the midterm. And I think Apple, that's typically where I think Apple will iterate on SKAD network, because the structure of how, I mean, they're not going to go back on the fact that they even come aggregated. This is staying, like, for sure. But I do believe they will iterate a bit. And the first thing I would recommend them to reiterate if they want to listen, but where I think they will end up iterating because of what I just said before, is the ability to receive different events for different periods of time than just having this first day and then this bizarre random timer that they put that basically makes the whole thing like not really practicable. So I think that will change, but that's, I don't know. I'm just guessing here.
Yeah, and I think definitely subscription apps can be at an advantage, because a trial oftentimes happens in the first couple of hours typically. Right?
Yeah. You have to monitor how you convert your trials after. And I've said, like, before all these changes, that a lot of subscription apps, they've moved to app event optimization based on free trial. But if you go too far with that, sometimes it's actually counterproductive, in the sense that you attract more and more of the cohorts that don't convert the trial, because some especially younger audience, they know exactly how to cancel trials. And here it will make things a little bit more complex, but most subscriptions apps have signups, and they will do it internally from their own. Like, we won't be able to attribute to like that ad and that ad group and whatever, but we can still study how the cohort evolve and correct it from a product point of view, which, by the way, makes me think that a lot of people are gonna add signups to the app. And it's typically something that very few gaming app, no, a lot of gaming app don't have signup, because they want to ease the process of just coming in. In the subscription app, it's pretty much the opposite. Like, almost everybody forces the sign up before being able to even use the app. And I think sign up is going to be more common in the future, which from a user perspective is a bit bad, because it's friction at the beginning, but I guess it will give also options for more personalization and so on. Let's see how that happens. But that wasn't the question. It just made me think about it.
Definitely, right? I know we have almost come up on time. Perhaps a good place to wrap, again, Eric and Nebo, we'd love to hear from you guys. What are you guys advising? What are you guys advising people you work with, apps and games you guys work with, to close this out? That would perhaps be a good place to do that.
I mean, my main advice is just to wait and, understand the changes coming, and learn about the issue as much as possible. But I think it's really hard to know how things will look like 2 months from now when things go live. I am slightly less bearish on the kind of IDFA opt-in rate or opt-in rates, or like how many people will share IDFA. Now that now that we know that basically we can ask users for that permission later. So kind of my proposal right now for the team and for some other people is basically to potentially build a solution that will just ask for like IDFA of payers, where then you would be able to share the revenue and payer information with the platforms, and potentially like create a workaround that way. So it might not be 10%, it might be like 20%, which is enough to get just the IDFAs of high value users. And the other thing is, like, I'd be cautious when planning new products, and make sure that the gaming companies are having a well-diversified portfolio, because we don't still know who's going to be the most impacted. My read is maybe social casino games will be most impacted because of the focus on like high-value players, but we don't know that yet. So just learn about what's going on, see what are the read like all the newsletters and what are the proposals that MPs are providing, and then we'll know in 2 months from now what the best solution is. But we'll probably spend a few more months in designing those and figuring out those.
Eric?
Yeah, I think, if you want to lean in heavily to the sort of SK ad network approach, then you want to start thinking about how your monetization ties into this kind of like conversion event timer, and how you sort of like use that to sort of like the most possible advantage, right? So like the idea there would be that, if you want to get, so if the ad networks are still optimizing at the campaign level around the events they're getting back, and you can kind of, you can sort of craft that user experience in such a way that you get to like the highest value conversion event within some kind of like reasonable amount of time after the install, then you can still sort of get that data back. So the problem with trying to sort of delay the timer on the IDFA pop-up is that, then you don't get access to the IDFA before that, right? So you don't get access to the IDFA until they say yes. And if they don't ever say yes, and then you don't ever get it, right? So if the idea there is to just sort of like, kind of convince the user that, hey, there's value here and I should let them track me or whatever, or maybe even to incentivize it, then you're just delaying like the amount of time or you're delaying that point at which you get the IDFA, and they can use that for ad optimization, right? So there's a trade-off. But my sense is like, this just sort of accelerates the trend of kind of trying to sort of maximize the opportunity that you get in the overlap between the sort of that period of onboarding when you can send a lot of like really meaningful data back to the networks, and the monetization design. So I feel like the kind of economy design is now going to be like even more tightly integrated with like the UA strategy, which was the direction things were heading. But I feel like the SK ad network sort of approach now magnifies the importance of that.
Definitely. And Nebo, you definitely spoke about that in the episode on the show earlier. And I think that's definitely going to get magnified. Definitely, I think this has far-reaching impact, not just for UA and marketing, but products and how we build them. We will definitely keep a lookout for how things evolve, shake up. Certainly, I'll be looking to you guys' inputs off channel. Certainly, everywhere you guys write and speak, definitely I'll be looking to you guys' inputs. This is perhaps a good place for us to wrap, you guys. Thank you so much again for being on the Mobile User Acquisition Show. Really, really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, cheers, guys.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the Mobile User Acquisition Show. If any of this was helpful or instructive, I would love for you to leave us a review or rating on iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcast fix. This podcast takes a ton of time, effort, and love to produce, and I deeply value every review and every piece of feedback that you share. Thank you for listening, and I will look forward to sharing our next episode soon.